Good morning. Thank you for joining us here. Sara just gave a little touch on kind of mental health challenges within the family. I'm going to elaborate a little bit on that before we get started. The emotional challenges of cystic fibrosis extend beyond the person diagnosed with the disease. Obviously, it can impact the entire family. The TIDES study, which was published in 2014, documented the high rates of depression and anxiety experienced by those with CF and their caregivers. Specifically, the TIDES study found symptoms of depression in 10% of adolescents with CF, 19% of adults with CF, and over 30% of parents, caregivers. The prevalence of symptoms of anxiety was even higher, and notably mothers had higher rates of anxiety than their children with CF. A diagnosis of cystic fibrosis places emotional stress upon the entire family system. It may alter communication between partners, spouses, and may lead to very different parenting practices between the child with CF and siblings who do not have CF. The daily health regimen and hospitalizations can disrupt routines and exacerbate stress for all members of the family. Couples may have differing opinions related to their children's CF care, including infection control and adherence. Siblings of those with CF may hide their own needs as they feel like they should not draw parents' attention away from their sibling with CF. And of course, on the other hand, the challenges of CF may also lead to resilience among family members, strengthening bonds and shifting priorities. So as Siri said, this morning we will be exploring the topic of mental health impacts of CF on the family with our panel here today. So we're going to start with introductions, and Jacob, if you don't mind going first, if you could give an introduction of yourself, sharing your relationship to CF and where you live, where you're from.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you so much for having me here today. Wonderful to see you all. My name is Jacob Fraker. I was born with CF. I was diagnosed in utero because my older brother was diagnosed when he was 2 years old. So my mom was pregnant with me when she got the diagnosis for my brother. And felt it prudent to get me tested then. So my family has always known I've had CF. I've lived with CF my whole life, along with my brother. I currently live in Sacramento, California, which is where I work. And yeah, wonderful to be here today. Thank you.
I think a lot of people in this room already know me, but I'm Hema. I live in Southern California. I have 2 sons. One is the one with CF, the older one, and he's now 35, diagnosed at the age of 14. And the second one is 32 years old, no CF, just a carrier. And they both live in Texas. I live in California. It's wonderful to be here on this panel.
Hi, I think also most people probably know me. I'm Sara. I am a sibling of someone with cystic fibrosis. Many of you know, also Anna Modlin. And so I actually live now in Marin County, and my sister lives all the way in Australia. So now we're a world apart. I was not born yet. So my sister is 7 years older than I am.
Hey, so I'm Gail Wright, and I have been married to Robert Wright, Bobby, when I first met him, for almost 41 years. And we've known each other for 45. I did not expect this out of myself right now. So Bob was 2 when he was diagnosed, because they didn't know what was going on at the time, and that was in 1966. And the life expectancy at that time was 6. And he turned 60. They were twins. I mean, their birth mother had twins in 1995. And then we adopted another little girl, and I guess her adoption was private. We went with the county the second time, and her adoption, she came to us in 2001 and has since had twin daughters of her own. And they all live with us. So our boys live, one in Amsterdam and one out just outside of Denver. So we're doing it again.
Thanks, everyone. Before we get into some of the topics and questions, I want to just thank the panel for being here, because the topic of mental health can somewhat be stigmatizing. So opening up this conversation, I think, is really rich for a number of reasons. One, I'm sure everyone out there will be able to relate to many of the things that are brought up today, right? So opening up the conversation gives people a sense of, oh, I'm not alone in this. It helps break the stigma. And it's extremely powerful, as we all know, hearing from people who have these experiences. So thank you again for doing that. We're going to go through the panel, and I'm curious how your family involvement with CF, whether you have it yourself, your parent, or your sibling, spouse, brought beauty and inspired resilience into your lives, and what have been the major challenges. So if you don't mind, Jacob, do you want to start with that one too?
Sure, happy to. So I think the story that I talk about a lot in regards to how I got to where I am today in terms of the work that I do, the person I am, was really my mother's resilience with CF. Managing, we have four of us. So I have a brother and I have two sisters, an older sister and a younger sister. Both of my sisters are not carriers and do not have CF. And so, like, my mother had to juggle all of that. And that was really incredible as a kid. I think you don't realize it quite as much, like how much goes into these types of things, right? But as you become an adult with CF and you learn to manage your own care, I think back on my mother having to manage my care, my brother's care, and my sister's. And the way that she did that was, just truly masterful. And I give her so many props. I think so much of how she was able to navigate the world and fight for us. Like when she got my brother's diagnosis around CF, she didn't know what it was. She was a single mother at the time. The doctor called and was like, "Yep, your boy has CF," and then hung up the phone. Um, and like she did not know what to do. So I mean, like, for her journey of like her advocacy, her research, her fight, to better educate herself and to better educate her children about who they are and what it would mean, is something that I think is just really incredibly beautiful and really allowed for me to get to where I am today in terms of how I navigate the world and my healthcare.
Hema, do you want to follow up on that? Thanks, Jacob.
Yeah, that's a tough one to follow. You had some great comments there. I think for us, there was some differences in the situation. My family situation was that we were going through a divorce with his father at the time of his diagnosis, which made it really hard for us to all be on the same page. But lucky for us, we had a lot of extended family and we were able to navigate. We're all kind of on the same page about this now as to, if we didn't have that family support, we wouldn't have been able to get to the points that we have gotten to. So that would be my take on how we navigated as a family. I actually sent these questions to my sons to answer, and they both gave me the same answers. And this is their answers. Their answer is that when he was diagnosed, the whole family came together to help make sure that he did what he needed to do to take care of himself. It inspired the whole family. So the plus in the diagnosis is it inspired the whole family to start taking their own health more seriously. So that probably is the silver lining, if you could ever call any silver lining in CF. But it did give everybody a wake-up call on, let's all take care of our health.
So I guess with some of the resiliency pieces. So for me, my whole life has been cystic fibrosis. My sister, as I said, 7 years older than me. So I came into CF as my life. And being a part of CFRI in this great community too, and watching so many people struggle and pass. And I think that has given me this incredible, deep appreciation for life that I didn't see with my peers. I didn't understand that there is just like people just take it so for granted. I think that's been a really big piece of resiliency for me. It has also, it pushed me to become a physician. So I'm a family doc as well. And I definitely did that because of my sister. So, and then another piece I was thinking about with this is, so because I do family medicine, a lot of it is preventative care, right? And it's, I don't know, most of my job is not prescribing medications. It's talking to people about how to actually get them to take it. Like, how do you figure out a habit? And it could be as simple as 1 pill a day, and it is such a struggle for people. And it's comical, right? Because I'm like, I've been in this community of all these people with cystic fibrosis that are just the best at preventative care. They take care of themselves so well in such extreme circumstances. They have to do so much. And yet it's such a struggle for me with it's like, just this one, just one in the morning, just a little bit of water. You'll be good. So yeah.
So I will dovetail on that particular thing. I actually wanted to say this and then we'll get back into it with the rest of it. But there was a period when our kids were little that I'm like early grammar school where Bob would just forget to take his enzymes at dinner. I think it was sort of just like getting everybody to the table. It wasn't a madhouse, but that's a lot of activity right then. And the table itself had a drawer in it. And at one point he put a cup in the drawer with dimes. And whatever kid reminded him to take his pill got the dime. And it didn't last super long, but it was sort of like, he was used to taking his enzymes. I mean, but for some reason, so that was, I think, sort of what Sarah was just saying is that, CF was just already our life when we adopted our kids. And that was a thing. I mean, in the community we were in, we were among the first to get married and we were among the first to have kids. We weren't the first or anything, but we were in that early group. And right now I'm actually sitting here thinking, I don't know, anybody got grandkids? I just don't know because again, with that passage of time, so many people that we knew are gone. So I don't have the connections that I used to have in the CF community. As life goes on, I think the resiliency thing kind of comes in is that our kids didn't grow up. Bob was not very ill, so we weren't doing the hospitalizations. We weren't doing the IV medicine. He doesn't have a port. They didn't have that stuff. Thank you, but it was still part of our lives. I mean, you still had to take the meds, and he had other health things that came up that were took a lot of time at times too. And I think they just kind of rolled with it. We were a busy house. I know that when they hit, probably wandered a little bit here, but when you get to high school and you do that thing on genetics, and what's the one they use? They use cystic fibrosis. And I would say to my kids, did you say anything about it? And they were teenagers and they said, no. Of course they didn't want anything. And they weren't willing to share that. So I think now that they're adults and the two don't live near us and the other one lives really near us, they can see the changes for sure when they come home. And we video call some, but that doesn't show the same stuff. But they're adults now. And I think they do understand that, he turned 60. We're not worried about dad dying while we're 10. So I think our situation was a little bit different. That and I will say what helped us probably deal with before, because we were married 11 years before we had the kids and we've known each other a long time, was the community that we were a part of that, for sure. Because it was that this is normal life and we can talk about this, what's normal for us. where you want other people just, they don't, not critically, but they don't have a clue because they're busy doing their life. So they don't necessarily understand what you're doing. So.
Thanks, everyone, for that rich response and for sharing so much. Sarah, as the child in the family without CF, did you ever feel like you had to kind of hold in your own concerns, issues, worries, things going on for you? Because your sister had CF, obviously.
Yeah, it was, so reading this question, I was like, well, obviously. Duh. So again, and I think that my experience may be different than other siblings, but because my sister was so much older and I was born into CF, I think for me, what was so hard was finding my own identity, because my world is CF and my world is my sister. And I grew up in, oh, we got to take care of Anna. And so part of that caregiving role comes out too, right? Of like, oh, my needs, nope. All right, we go to her. And so I really became a caregiver and like the peacemaker, which I think a lot of well children do. So I think that what's also been interesting is like, as I have grown and tried to find my own sense of identity, I'm like, I don't even know what I want. I have no idea, because what I've always wanted is for other people to be happy, for Anna to be healthy, for my family to strive and do well. So that's been my own personal struggle, which, you know, has been interesting. It's like, how do I find my own identity in CF when the world is CF?
And if you don't mind following up on that a little bit, Sarah, do you have any recommendations or thoughts for parents that have a child with CF and one without, and kind of navigating that?
Yeah. I think this is another one of the questions I've struggled with the most, because I think every situation is so different. So I teach at the medical school, and right now we actually have a couple of CF siblings in there, which is amazing. They're both in the same year. I think I have looked for many years. I'm like, where are the siblings? There's not a whole lot that show up. They're off doing their own things. And I think everyone's experience is so different. And now in the age of the modulators and people doing so well, I think people have different experiences. But for me, like, Anna was always not horrendously sick, but never super thrived, right? There was always things. There was hospitalizations, and, you know, I graduated college, and she had her transplant and helped her get through it. So like, it was significant for me. Whereas I don't know if it affects people as much if people are doing better and they're not really going to all of the doctor's visits together. But for me, again, I said, like, it was about my identity. So I think that's my advice, is helping your children find their own identity and who they are. I think that's a piece. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. And Hema, parent of one child with CF and one, well, adult child, no, children, one without. I'm wondering if you want to follow up on that a little bit.
I do want to follow up on that, because when I heard you speak, Sarah, that sounded like my son. That sounded like every single thing he would say. In fact, I did get his answers on that question too, and I'll tell you that in a moment. But for me, I can look back and I can say I would probably do some things differently. Why? Because it is that child that is trying to find their identity. We know the one with CF has an identity, where they identify with, you know, some of the lifestyle that they've had to change. But what about the one that doesn't? What happened to them? Where do they find that identity? It's hard. And I think that we've been able to navigate through a little bit of that, through counseling, through me noticing, saying, I see you, I see that you need something different, you need the attention. And his answer to this was, his recommendation is that we see, he says, I think it's ensured that we don't take moments for granted. He said, if I had any advice to give, he would say, don't just look at the child, the one with CF and their identity, look at the other one and help them to understand their own health, because when you're so concerned about the one with the CF issues, the health, that's a huge part of it. Do you remember that their health is also important? Do you remember to remind them to do their things that they need to do? So his input to that was make sure that, you know, the advice he would give every parent is make sure you are seeing each of them for who they are.
Thanks, Hema, and thanks to your sons too for answering the questions. Appreciate it. Jacob, what about you? As a person with CF yourself, your brother has CF, you're both, you know, adults now as well. Looking back on kind of your history, thoughts about the sibling relationship, and even continuing into adulthood, right? Because the mental health stuff, as we talked about earlier, extends into adulthood. And yeah, I mean, you're still people with CF even as adults. So any thoughts from you?
Yeah, and I really appreciate the conversation. I think there are certainly some similarities. Me and my brother are both had the same mutation, both homozygous Delta 508, and his presented much more respiratory. Mine presented much more digestive, right? So I had all the gastrointestinal issues, but my brother had all the respiratory issues. And there's something kind of scary as a young kid and even as an adult. My brother's, you know, a few years older than me, to kind of constantly see my future in CF, right? Joseph was the first to get hospitalized. Joseph was the first to get like a PICC line. He was the first to, you know, go through so many of these. He had to do all of these things first, and I had to watch that. And that was always really scary for me as a kid. And then also seeing how my mother then would respond, right? When we were born and raised, and most of my family still live in a small little town, Sonora, California, Tuolumne County. And so we would have to drive to San Francisco for our healthcare. It's a 3-hour trip one way. So when we would get hospitalized, my mom would take whoever was going to the right, my brother, for the most part, he got hospitalized a lot more than I, and she would be gone in San Francisco for weeks at a time with my brother. And so I definitely relate to kind of the caregiver role, and that I feel like that is the role that I took on as, you know, trying to really be good about my healthcare, really be good about school, right? Like my brother was always having different kind of exacerbations and different issues. And so I wanted to be the lower maintenance kid with CF. I didn't want my mom to have to worry about me as much. I didn't want my mom to have to, you know, have another child that she's having to go to the hospital with and do all these different things. And so I definitely took on that caregiver role and kind of suppressing my needs and my kind of care, and to try to kind of buffer some of what my family was experiencing. So I definitely went through that, and, you know, that CF, like it just can take over everything. It can be the focus of everything. And when you have one child that, you know, has more exacerbations, or that their CF presents differently, it can create more of a focus. And so that is, we have, you know, certainly have carried that role forward. My brother still has a lot more health issues. He's on disability. He's not able to work. And so I've become his caregiver. I help him manage his care. I go with him to his doctor's appointments. And so I think I still a lot of times really sacrifice or kind of suppress my level of care to care for my brother. So some of those things have carried over from when we were kids to where we are now. And it still is scary to see my future. It is still scary to see, you know, oh gosh, you know, is that what 40% lung function looks like? Is that what 30% lung, you know, like, and what is that going to mean for me? So there's a lot of that happens where it is a really scary piece of it that I have to kind of work through myself. But so definitely, you know, really empathize with a lot of the other viewpoints here, and it is kind of very unique.
Jacob. And Gail, you and your husband obviously have some children, and again, adult children now at this point, but thinking back, through your history with your family when they were kids, and maybe even now, you spoke a little bit to this earlier, as they're adults, how have you seen Bob having CF impact your family dynamics?
Well, oh yeah, Mike. I do think because Bob was not as ill, that it was, it's like take your enzymes. It wasn't anything really dramatic. There were some other things when he was, he had pancreas divisum. And so that wasn't diagnosed until it doesn't present until your late 30s, early 40s. And that was a lot of drama because he was in so much pain that it would sort of halt a lot of things. And when we were told his pancreas would digest itself, which it did. And so he was having less pain because of it, he would get off the pain meds and his irritability would be huge. And Bob, if you know him, is a very funny, nice man. And he was not necessarily nice when that was happening. He would just take my head off with verbal comments. And I actually understood. I understood that where it was, why it was coming out of him. I understood that. But at one point I looked at him and I realized our kids cannot hear him talking to me like this. And so I actually said to him, we have to do something about this. We have to get some help for you. We were like, the next time this happens, because it would, he would be back on the pain meds and then go off them. The next time this happens, we should do something. And I think we both looked at each other and went, now is a time. Like, not next time, let's do it now. And so we did actually, another story, but I think there were things maybe about how we interacted that we needed to watch for the kids. Because Bob was, this is not news, because Bob was not as ill, he didn't necessarily want to do everything that everybody said was the best for him to do. And one of his comments was, I can do all his thoughts, I can do all of this stuff, and maybe I'll live 6 months to a couple of years longer. But in the shorter period of time that I might live, well, I've gone ahead and just lived and not had all my time and energy focused on this. And I think for his situation, that was probably right for him. Not a thing that you necessarily say out loud, but I also think it was Gem or the New England Journal, I can't remember now, had an article about this, about what are we doing if we're regimenting people into doing all this stuff. Does it make that big a difference in the course of their life? Does it make a big difference? It was probably 20, 25 years ago. Unfortunately, our family physician had read that and could sort of adapt to what Bob was and wasn't willing to do. But I had another thought in there. Hang on a second. I did write myself some notes. Another thing that was sort of a plus, maybe because of him having CF, is when there was a point where it was difficult for him to continue to get up and go to work, but it was easy to work at home long before. It was it was people were doing it, but not like they were. You know what a real great plus to that was? He was always home. So his kids had his kids our kids had their dad a lot more than a guy that was commuting all the time. It gave us a lot of flexibility as a family. Like if I had to go somewhere with one of them, I could have maybe only take one of them. I didn't have to take all three of them because the other ones could hang out at home with dad. We used to wonder sometimes, will they understand what it is to get up and go to work? Gets up, goes to his desk. But I think that was actually a plus. And he wasn't as ill. Now we're sort of in this extra new chapter, repeat mode, where we have these grandkids that live with us. Well, you know what? His nebulizer doesn't live in the living room anymore because we didn't want them getting tangled up in the tubing. I mean, like actually, like don't choke yourselves on the tubing. That should be in another part of the house. And he does, he inhales cholesterol, every 28 days. All that's in our room. And he mixes that when they're not even around. He mixes it at night and gives it in the morning because then we don't have to worry about them knowing that there's a syringe and a needle there. We just don't even have to think about it because they're only 3. They want to play with everything. I mean, in a good way, right? They want to play with everything. So that to me, I think is like looking ahead is what will it be for them who live with him all the time as if he becomes more ill. Now they're sort of used, they came in again at the level of illness that he's at, but I think that will be one to look at. Or the kids as adults, I just think because they're adults, they can deal with it. When I was a kid, something happened, my parents said, we will explain that to you when you're older. And when they did explain it to me, I was like, you were right to explain that to me when I was older, because I wouldn't have gotten it as a kid, but I can absolutely handle what you're saying now. So, we have to negotiate the next path forward, but I think sometimes I just kind of meander off from my sorry.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Gail. That's wonderful. Shifting gears just slightly, still on the topic of mental health, emotional well-being. There is a lot of stigma. I feel like it's gotten better actually since COVID. But there's a lot of stigma around mental health needs, emotional well-being, maybe asking for help, right? Sometimes even, people experience maybe a little bit of stigma around having a chronic illness, right? Curious what you guys would, if there's anything you want to share about stigma and overcoming it just generally out there, and if there's anything you've done yourself to overcome it, or how did you reach out to help, or how did you feel empowered with it? So maybe Jacob, let's start with you again, if it's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. Mental health was definitely something that didn't really engage with, I think, until I was older, until I was out of the house and in college. I'm a social worker by profession. And so mental health certainly became a big aspect of who I was and the work that I did. But growing up, mental health wasn't really a thing. My family didn't get mental health care. That wasn't something we did. The closest thing to kind of mental health care that I would get on a regular basis was my medical social worker when we would go in for our checkups. Which at the time, right, when you're just having a conversation with something, it doesn't always feel like therapy, right? And that therapy can be kind of the scary word. But there's nothing wrong with just talking to somebody about what's going on, right? We do that with friends, we do that with family. And so I think having that medical social worker really helped kind of ease into this idea of the mental health world, that it wasn't, right, like a shrink, right? You go and you kind of have this vision of sitting on the couch and talking about your childhood. But with a social worker, right, it was just so easy and comfortable just to talk about what's going on at home, what's going on at school, what are thoughts and feelings about that. And so that really was kind of my entrance into mental health care. I think while I was able to really embrace and engage in it when I left, my brother has really struggled with getting access to mental health care and wanting access to mental health care. We would talk a lot. He would be like, "Can I just talk to you? Let me just talk to you." And I'm like, "Girl, you don't pay me enough. I cannot. I've got my own job. I've got that cannot also be your therapist." I said, "I love you and I will always be here for you as your brother, but you've got to work through some of these things. You've got your own, that over reliance on family, and because we share so many kind of aspects of our personality, there can be that this want to just I'll just talk to my brother about this. Let me just talk to my brother about this." And then that's when I get a call at 2 p.m. when I'm at work and he's having a crisis, and I'm like, now was not the time. And so really working with him to be comfortable asking for help, to be comfortable, going outside of the family to talk about what's going on and really be vulnerable. I think, it can be, as often as folks with CF have to talk about our mortality and how, right, like our mortality is given to us day one, it is still really scary to talk about when you're going through it, when you're seeing your health decline, when you think about where you were in high school, when you think about where you were in your early 20s, and then where we are now. It is really scary to kind of talk about and own up to what the future holds, or doesn't hold for us. And so my brother's really struggled with that, and he has gotten better at doing some of these things. But a lot of it is rooted in, I'm like, you know, it is, I know you want to talk to me and I want to talk to you about these types of things, but I want you to use that frame when you're thinking about mental health care, right? I want you to think about your therapist as a friend that you are just talking to about some of the issues or things that are going on in your life, and not as some sort of therapy, that there's something wrong with you, that like, that's not what this is about. This is just about you processing some of the questions and things that you have going on, and not calling your brother when he's in the middle of work or at midnight because you're having a whole spiral in your bed. So more appropriate and time efficient conversations. But so that was really the frame, I think, that has helped shift him more into embracing mental health care. And I think it's done a whole lot of good for him.
Jacob, thank you so much. And I love a lot of what you said, because you just gave a framework to other people in the room or who are watching virtually, like specific words that can be used with someone, right, to maybe encourage them to seek out some mental health care. And I want to, being a social worker within clinic, one of the things I love about the interdisciplinary clinic, CF clinic, is that there is a social worker, right? And I personally appreciate that I see patients at every single appointment for the most part. So that kind of establishes a relationship. We can kind of start a little bit more delicately with those difficult topics. And then because I see them 2 or 3 months later, we can just get in a little bit further. So thank you also, Jacob, for mentioning the social work role. Sarah, just curious if you have any thoughts on kind of stigma around mental health, emotional well-being, and
yeah, a couple of thoughts. So I think one, there's a huge stigma, especially around physicians and being vulnerable with their mental health. You can lose your license, right? So it's changing, it is. But I definitely think about this quite a lot, and I talk about it with all my medical students, like taking care of themselves. But really what I'm doing is I'm being super vulnerable. So somewhat unintentionally, sometimes intentionally, but I do this one lab. I've done it for the past couple of years with them, where it's on cystic fibrosis. And so I play this clip of The Power of Two, which my sister's in, if you guys haven't seen it. And I normally get through it just fine. But then this year, I get this text message from my sister's husband. Hannah's in kidney failure. She's not doing well. It's really not looking good. Just like, oh God, I'm about to do this whole like lab all day long at this. And this is my first lab going through it. I just like started bawling in the front of the class and had to take a few minutes. But, you know, after that, how many students reached out to me of like, thank you so much for being so vulnerable with me, with us, and sharing that piece. But I think it opens the space too for other people to be vulnerable and talk about what's going on. And then I think another part of as far as like the well sibling goes and reaching out for help, it's the perspective shift too, of my needs are, I don't have needs. What are you talking about? No needs here. And I've thought about it for years. I was like, should I go get there? Nah, I don't have any problems. I'm good. Comparatively, my problems are great. So I think that it took a while for me to accept that, like, maybe I really should be working on my mental health. Because maybe there's some things. Just few. I'm allowed to have my own feelings and emotions, and I'm allowed to reach out for help. So that's been something that I've been, again, working on. It's like finding that identity, that sense of self, that like that I am worthy as well. And one more thing, the other thing that I wanted to just mention, which you mentioned as well, as a well sibling, and I think as every caregiver, in whatever role, I think that what I've been like pondering on is just the observation of the suffering, right? It's just ongoing observation of your loved one suffering and like not really being able to do anything about it. So it's just hard to hold forever. It's just being the observer.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks again, Jacob. And what I am hearing is exactly like you said, like opening up that space, which we are doing right now, even too, right? Which opens up the space for everyone here to share with each other as well. So thank you. Hema, Gail, I don't know if you had anything more that you guys wanted to add about.
I do. The mental health side for me, there's one thing that maybe some people don't know about me is I am a social worker in England. When I moved here, that was my profession. I was a social worker. So mental health was always important to me. I moved to the States and my life fell apart. I had a lot of things happen, including the diagnosis. And that's when I tapped into mental health and said, you know what, there is counseling support from CFRI. And I started taking that support because to me, I needed it and I understood that. But how hard was it for me to explain that to the children? That was where my biggest challenge lay, is now how do I get them to understand? And it's been challenging even up to now. And like you said about the non-CF child is the one that, do I really need anything? My mom's been pushing me to get counseling, but do I really need anything? I'm not sure I do. And it's only been, he admitted to me yesterday, that's only recently he has actually taken up on the counseling and started getting some for himself. But it took a long time. It took a long time to get him to that point because, again, do I really have anything wrong with me? You know, do I need this? It's my brother that needs it. My mom needs it, but I don't. And that went on for quite a bit of time. So the mental health side of things is not just counseling, not just therapy. It's also talking to people. I spent, after his diagnosis, I think between 5 and 7 years before I even met anyone connected to CF. I was totally isolated. I just thought it was such a rare disease that there was no one in the world with it. And, you know, I didn't know how to Google. I was coming out of being a total housewife, didn't know anything about anything. And I lived in isolation for quite a while, even though I had been a social worker for 10 years in England. It just didn't occur to me that this is the time to start thinking about things. It took for this community, the CFRI community, to make me, I remember coming to this, the first conference I came to was a week after I had gotten onto that support call, the support group. And I had talked to, I think there was a few people that I remember being on the call, maybe you, Robin, and Siri, and then a few others. And I was told about this conference. And I did everything in my power to get to this conference. And when I came here, I was totally surprised that there was such a great resource for me. And that was the beginning of building my own community for my own mental health. If I could get, my one big thing on my wish list is to get my kids to do the same thing, which is a little bit harder as we talk about, you know, the one with the CF, he's getting more involved. As you saw the photo on the screen yesterday, he's listening to Siri and is a lot more involved. I always tell Siri that he listens to you, he'll do whatever you tell him, but when I tell him, so he's getting a lot more involved. And my non-CF son actually did do he did the podcast with, I believe it was Vertex. I can't remember who it was with. And it was on the mental health side of this. So we're getting there. We're moving into the right space. But do we ever really get there? It's ongoing. And we have to keep that support system active for the mental health piece.
Yeah, thanks for that, Hema. And that's also why I've kind of repeatedly also said it's not just about the kids with CF, right? It's about, and especially as people with CF are living longer, it's about being adults with CF, right? And yeah, I had another thought, but I can't remember it. But Gail, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I have just one sort of brief thing. As the years have gone on, I have, like all of us, figured out who can I talk to and who can I not. Who is not helpful to talk to.
Yeah.
And usually it's because they just don't understand. They don't understand. And maybe being an RN helps a little bit because some of the stuff, some of the mechanics of it are not foreign to me. Bob had to do an IV antibiotic at home recently, and we were trying to figure out the timing with the girls, and he forgot to, he was going to do it. He's totally capable. He was all ready the first morning and set his alarm. The second morning, he forgot to set his alarm, but I was up anyway. And he's like, kind of like not really awake. I'm like, you want me to just do it for you? It's no big deal to hook him up in 3 minutes. I don't have to think about it. But I think really knowing who can you talk to, who's helpful, whether they're professionals or not, because sometimes professionals, you're not necessarily clicking with, if they don't understand chronic illness. You know, sometimes that's not acute is one thing, but chronic is another. So anyway, that's it.
I'm gonna make one more comment if that's okay. Because that's definitely a piece. And I think like as a well sibling, you're kind of like, where do I fit in this? And I think for me, finding who are my people that I could really talk to was difficult, right? You're kind of like the inside outsider.
And one of the things we do know about mental health and emotional well-being and families, people with chronic medical conditions, is that having a sense of community really builds resilience, right? So yes, maybe there are therapists or other people, social workers that one can see, but having that sense of community really builds resilience. So thank you.